This is Scott Allen Miller with Sam IT. Today I want to talk about the basics of VoIP, that's voice over IP. I'm not going to go into any details today. I want to talk about it at the very highest level. VoIP is a pretty simple concept, but some things about it in the industry make people feel like it must be a special case and different than everything else, and this simply isn't true. VoIP is very, very simple. We have lots of protocols that we deal with all the time, such as email with the SMTP protocol, and we have web with HTTP. VoIP is no different. We need servers, we need clients, things to act like email servers, things to act like email clients. That would be like Exchange and Outlook. In the VoIP world, this is called a PBX and a soft phone or a hard phone. Hard phones being the ones that sit on your desk, and soft phones being the ones that are just software. Easy stuff. It works exactly the same as everything else on your network. It's not a special case. This is the key to understanding VoIP. Every time you think something kind of weird or complex might occur, say to yourself, VoIP is not a special case. It's just audio traffic over the internet. That's it. Technically over internet protocol. So that could be your LAN or a WAN, doesn't matter. Now the one thing that catches people with VoIP is that most people don't just mean voice over IP. They are implying that they also want that voice over IP to connect to the PSTN. That's the public switched telephone network. The PSTN, or public switched telephone network, is a network that is not IP based. It is very old. It predates the internet protocol by a very long time, many decades. And it is what uses a style of all numeric address that you know as a telephone number. If you want to be able to dial a telephone number, the 11-digit, 1-800, whatever, that dialing has to talk to the PSTN because it is the PSTN's network, not some arbitrary IP address that those numbers refer to. And this is where things get slightly complicated if we're taking VoIP to this level. Of course, a lot of VoIP doesn't go to that level because some things that are VoIP include Skype or Google Hangouts or XMPP voice traffic or your PBX just without an attachment to the PSTN. There are lots of ways to do VoIP. And while most people imply that they want to talk to the PSTN, that's not required for it to be VoIP. And a lot of modern systems use VoIP without referring to it in that way through tools like Skype and Google Hangouts and so forth. And of course, WebEx and GoToMeeting and those sorts of things. They're all using VoIP without the PSTN connection. Now that PSTN connection must come from a phone carrier. It must, because they're the ones who own the gateway to the PSTN. There are traditional ISPs and telephone carriers who have these kinds of connections offered to you. Companies like Verizon, AT&T, Sprint. We know them pretty well from legacy times. But there are new players who are pure VoIP gateways to the PSTN, such as VoIP.ms, Twilio, VoicePulse, players like that. In the VoIP world, we generally assume that we're going to need to make that connection. We can think of that as a PSTN gateway. Often people simply refer to it as getting a SIP trunk. This is a little bit confusing because it's not always delivered over SIP, SIP being the Session Initiation Protocol. It is not actually SIP that handles the trunk, and we use SIP in a whole bunch of other places in most cases. Some of that terminology is legitimately confusing. But when you're out acquiring a SIP trunk, that is a gateway to the PSTN. And the phone number, the address that you have on the PSTN, is known as a DID, a direct inward dial, right? I probably got that wrong, but it's a DID, and that's what we call it. And so when you want someone to be able to call you from a non-VoIP system, right? Most people, when they say, I want to get a phone call, that means they want a cell phone to be able to call you. They want someone with an old landline to be able to call you. They want someone with new modern VoIP to call you. That call must traverse the PSTN. That's the only way that that phone number is going to work. But if you want to call people directly and bypass the PSTN, of course you can do that. The exact same way that email works. You can, if they have it set up, you can use an email style address and use VoIP directly. There's no need to go through the PSTN It's just we're so used to using the PSTN for everything, and you have to use it for things like cell phones, that we keep using it even though we have more modern systems that could bypass that. We'll get more into that later in more videos about VoIP, but at this point I just wanted to give some really high level views of, one, VoIP is not special. There's nothing special about it as a technology. It works just like everything else you're used to. And when people refer to making phone calls using phone numbers, they're talking about the PSTN, and you need some way to gateway from your VoIP system to the PSTN, and typically that's going to be through a SIP trunk provider. You can get connections through things like PRIs or old POTS lines, but those things then require the gateway to sit on your devices instead of being handled somewhere else, and it removes a big piece of VoIP, ending it sooner. We'll get into all that more, but by understanding this high level, I hope that it makes VoIP easier for you to understand as we dive into it. We haven't talked really about specific protocols because VoIP doesn't mean a specific protocol. A lot of people use it and mean SIP and RTP, the real-time protocol, which is what actually carries the majority of VoIP calls, but not necessarily. There are other alternatives. There are all kinds of different technologies and approaches to this, but they all involve putting audio packets digitized onto the internet protocol and being able to traverse a LAN, a WAN, go through a VPN, or whatever. That's the commonality. So keeping it simple will help us dive into more specifics about how VoIP works, why a lot of myths and misconceptions happen, how we can avoid them, and how we can approach VoIP in such a way that it works best for us. Again, remember to like and subscribe and comment below about your experiences with VoIP, your questions, what you need to learn about, and more.